Today, the Cure Chronicles is joined by Janeli Alejandra, a TikToker and mother of three. Janeli was diagnosed with HIV in 2010. She fell in love and did not let the fact that her soon-to-be husband was living with HIV stop her from marrying him. They were cautious throughout the relationship, but shortly after getting married, Janeli tested positive for HIV. It took her some time to get to where she is now, but she decided to start sharing her story on TikTok to give others helpful information and hope for the future. Today, Janeli is an HIV advocate both on social media and in her real life.
Janeli, thank you so much for joining me today on the Cure Chronicles.
Thanks for having me.
Really our pleasure. And I got to say, I was really struck by your story because as far when I really looked into the articles and read some of the things that you'd written, it occurs to me that your story is a love story with a twist or, with a complication, right? A challenge. And I think everybody in the world can identify with that. I mean, the most famous Shakespeare play, right, is all about love with and the complications that come with it.
Yeah.
And it's really interesting, like how well you put everything in perspective surrounding that story. But go ahead and for the benefit of folks that haven't heard of you already, give us the background on, sort of your husband and your family.
Of course. Yeah. So I'm Janeli. I have been living with HIV for about 12 years now, about as long as I've been married. And that's kind of important to the story because I met my husband in college. We were amongst the same friends. I came down here to San Antonio from Dallas for school. Saw him on the first day of orientation. I had that like punch in my gut feeling, everything stopped, and I was like, that's him. And I remember hearing that word and thinking like out loud, that's him. Like, he's not even that cute. And, like, I was like, not my type. He's very, very handsome now. But
I seen a picture of him. He's quite handsome.
He's quite handsome.
Yeah,
but back then he was, had like this, I was not what I was into, like super grungy. He was like barefoot on stage, leading like this orientation talk. It was just like totally not my type. Okay. Anyway, so I met around the same circle of friends. And then I found out through, just through mutual, friends and activities we did together on campus that he liked me. And I was like, okay, well, I don't know where this is going to go. Lo and behold, we start kind of dating a little bit, just casually. And I'm kind of like, hey, it's not going to like the next step. He's not being serious. Like, what's going on? And finally, on Valentine's Day of all days, he made me a lobster dinner and made this beautiful, dinner. And he was like, hey, come over. And we just, we're chatting. And I was like, what's going on with this? Like, why can't we go to the next step? And he just started bawling, crying and said, I'm dying. And I said, what do you mean you're dying? And he said, well, I have HIV. And then I heard someone say, well, you have HIV, you're not dying. Right. And then I realized that person was me. It was like a complete out of body experience. It was pretty crazy.
Oh yeah. The shock must have been incredible.
Yeah, exactly. So I had been educated about HIV and sex from a very early age. Thanks to my mom. She was a practice manager for an OBGYN. She saw tons of young teenage girls come in, get pregnant, get STDs, not understanding how they got it. So she made sure that me and my siblings were super educated and given kind of like the hard truth about sex and everything early on. So I wasn't really scared of, I don't want to say I wasn't scared of STDs, but I was educated about them. I approached them from that sense. So anyway, so he says, okay, I understand if you don't want to be with me anymore. And I thought, I don't know. I'm already in love with this guy. I really, truly, I was. And so, he drove me back to campus. And then he was like, I'll leave it up to you. I was like, I can't stop thinking about you. You're the guy for me. And so we kept dating. And apparently I just learned this, a few years ago, was that he, in his mind, thought any minute, any day, she's going to break up with me. Well, I didn't. And about a year later, he proposed to me. And I said, yes, if you get on treatment, because I know you're not consistent with your treatment right now. Wow. And he hadn't been consistent with it. He was too nervous. I think it takes a while to really commit, right, to treatment, now that I know that. So anyway, we go to his appointment. He gets on treatment. He had just started. And then this was in March. We move in together. we set the date in March for our wedding to happen in July, super quick engagement. May we move in together, and we, engaged in sex with condoms, and the condom broke. And so we didn't find out till well after, that there was quite a bit of exposure, for lack of a better word. And he wasn't undetectable yet. He hadn't gotten that call. So we had talked to the doctor about it. He said, be careful, use condoms, but just be careful. So we're thinking, we're two young kids, we're like, all right, yeah, they said, yes, let's do it. So like, we were really careful about it. And all before then, we were incredibly careful, and actually weren't very sexually active because of it, because we were both too nervous. So anyway, when the exposure happened, I thought, you know what, he's on meds. I'm sure it'll be okay. I know he's not really undetectable, but I'm sure it wasn't that much. I'm sure it'll be fine. And he begged me to go to the hospital. He's like, let's go. I don't know what they can do. I'm thinking there's nothing they can do, right? There's nothing that they can do. But there's exposure prophylaxis, which I didn't know about. So anyway, cut to, I seem fine. I go get a test. Everything's fine. Didn't wait long enough to get the test. So I'm like, okay, I'll just keep going and see, for 3 months and see what happens. We get married. We're newlyweds. We're enjoying life. Still have this kind of thing in the back of our heads that could be haunting us. It gets to about September, and I go for a checkup, and I tell them I need to get tested. They test me. I get a call the next day, and I'm like, for sure, something's wrong. I'm like, cancer, like it's something else. Like I did not want to think it was HIV, because I was so scared. We had sold both my parents and his parents on this idea that we would be a mixed status couple. That was kind of how they felt comfortable with us moving forward. We're both very close-knit Latino family. Our parents kind of knew everything. We were honest about our situation. But it was kind of like, we'll get married with the caveat of we're going to be a mixed status couple. So anyway, I get the results. I'm positive. It was really tough. Just like any kind of diagnosis, it was traumatic. And for us, it was hard, because it really forced us to have conversations that we didn't have. I mean, when you're newlyweds, you kind of have lots of conversations. You think, dang, why didn't we think of this before we got married? But when you add this to it, it was really tough. And he completely understood of us thinking that we might separate, and we kind of did temporarily. We were just like, I just need to figure this out.
Wow.
Yeah, I needed to get my head around it,
Sure.
So we separated for not very long, maybe a couple weeks, and just to kind of get my brain around it. And I thought, I was willing to marry this man, and everyone asked me why. They're like, why? People who knew him by the status, they were like, well, why would you marry him? And I thought, Jake is Jake, right? If I could cut HIV out of him, I would, and I would still marry him. And I thought, we are still who we are. We are not HIV. If I could cut this out of us and move on, he would still be the person I choose. So that's really what kind of led us to where we are today, with 3 children, all HIV negative, living a pretty boring life, just here in Texas, raising our kids, running them.
Oh, that can't be boring. 3 kids, right?
Yeah, no, I mean, it's not.
Let's call it a normal life.
Normal life. We'll do that. Yeah, we'll do normal. We play referees between the kids, making sure they don't, kill each other, and then we also, love movie nights and just snuggling on the couch. It's just a regular thing, and so, there's a saying that another HIV positive creator says, that he's like, I forget I'm HIV positive until I take my meds at night. And it's so true, because you really, especially once you reach an undetectable viral load, you kind of forget. Like, I go to the doctor every 6 months. The only time it was really kind of always over my head, especially was when I was pregnant. But that was really more my own paranoia and just fear. And the doctors all along were like, you're going to be fine. So anyway, that was quite a long-winded answer, but that's where we are today.
Hey, you just saved me asking all the follow-up questions. You told a great story there, but my mind is full of questions. So let me start. I mean, first of all, I love this. It was love at first sight.
Yeah.
Wow. I mean, like, you knew this was the guy for you, even though he wasn't, even wrapped the way that you thought he could be wrapped, right? Like somehow you just, I don't know what it is. It's like, it was actually like soul's meaning. That's really very, very cool part of this story.
Yeah.
And then, it's also interesting that it was really hard for him to come clean with you about his HIV status, right? Now he was being really, really careful, right? But he was keeping it all inside of himself, right? When in fact, what's amazing is how supportive you ended up being about it, and that you just happen to have a background where, again, you were kind of meant for him, right? This was, all of these things were still open discussions. Now, what struck me was that he knew he was HIV. He had been diagnosed with HIV for a while, and he wasn't good about taking his antiretrovirals. And you said you feel like it takes some time to get used to that idea or whatever. Like, what do you see? What is it that prevents people from just jumping on, especially the latest meds? What was stopping him in your mind, or even, information that since then, that if it's okay for you to reveal?
No, I can't.
Yeah.
He's giving me
what prevented him?
Yeah, I can talk about it. From what I've gathered from my conversations with him and with other people who are newly diagnosed, we have to remember that getting diagnosed with HIV is quite traumatic. And it often, not always, but it often comes from a place of extreme vulnerability, which is, your sexual, right? So there might be some fear there with your sexuality, you're not fully either, I don't want to say out of the closet, because that insinuates, gay men, but you might just be dealing with it. And I think as an American society, we're still not quite open-minded about sex in a really positive way.
Yeah, you bring up something very interesting. I'm sorry.
No, it's okay.
No, because I just want to point this out, is that, you just hit the first stigma point, right? Like, what's the first question you think of when somebody gets HIV, especially if they're male?
Yep.
Right?
Yep.
And yet it is just a stigma. It has no connection with reality.
Right.
And yet it remains from even the 80s, where it was considered a gay disease, right?
Yes.
Okay. So anyway, he's vulnerable.
He's dealing with it, and so I think he was dealing with, how it happened for him, and then also it would, like you said, it's much easier, right, to keep living on your life. Especially, he had no symptoms. He had, to this day, he's had no symptoms, right? So he didn't have to deal with it. And it wasn't until, he was met with the possibility of being with someone new who didn't know about it, who he didn't have to, report his HIV status to, because he called everybody and was like, hey, I'm going to be honest with you. I'm sorry. This is what happened. Go get tested. And I was kind of like a new piece, not a new piece. God, that sounds awful, but a new person.
Meanwhile, he was trying to keep you out of that group that he
correct.
Admitted
yeah.
to,
Like I was a new
yeah.
person. He didn't have to, ever tell me if he didn't want to, unless he wanted to keep going further. So it really wasn't until I challenged him and was like, look, I know you like me. Like, you made this lobster dinner for me, dude, on Valentine's Day.
You're not hiding your affection for me very well.
Right. So
and I can tell you're attracted to me also.
Yes,
there's little
exactly.
breadcrumbs here. So what's
what's going on? So and that's kind of where it was. And I don't know. I can't tell you why we were dating, push him to go get treatment. I would bring it up, and I could tell it was just so painful for him that I didn't want to. I was too nervous. I figured, that's bigger than me. I don't know what I can do. But so when it was
for him, this is really interesting, right?
Yeah.
Like he was having trouble putting pressure on himself to go ahead and get treatment, to become fully suppressed of the virus, right? And you even were hesitant to put pressure on him because you could feel it. You could actually empathize with it. What is it? What is it?
It's stigma.
It's stigma. Like, what characteristics? Like, what's the wall that people are having trouble breaking through here?
Yeah, I hear you. It's what I mentioned before, right? So my husband, at that time, he's since grown. He was incredibly, I think he was ashamed of his past sexual, history. I think he had a lot of shame about it. And so, just like you said, he wanted to keep me separate because he was like, you are going to be my wife one day. He kind of almost put me on this pedestal that I eventually had to be like, dude, don't put me here. Like, I'm on the ground with you. But I think he had to deal with just the stigma or the shame that he had to deal with, and kind of facing his previous actions, his, all, what he did as a young college guy, just like not thinking like he's, living careless and free. And so,
Yeah.
yeah, I would say it was that. And for me, I was also, I didn't know about, his how his sexual history too much, other than obviously he had been, at one time he was honest, was promiscuous and was careless in that he didn't use protection. And I didn't want to think about it, really, honestly, too. And then also I felt like that was really his kind of the ball had to be in his court. It didn't matter if I like dragged him to the clinic and made him take medicine. The ball really had to be in his court until he proposed to me, and like I was like, okay,
Yeah,
yes,
you really have a stake in it
like,
at that
yeah,
point.
yeah,
It's your
right,
life
exactly.
too.
I was like,
Right,
I
that
am,
makes total sense.
yeah, I basically told him, I said, I am not marrying you to be a widow. Like,
Yeah.
you
Well, that's
will.
another,
Yeah.
that's another really great point. So
Yeah.
he breaks down that night and says that he's dying. I mean,
Yeah.
like, nobody who's diagnosed with HIV anymore needs to think of themselves as dying, right? I mean, am I correct about that?
From what I know, yeah.
Yeah, from everything I know,
Yeah.
that, you get on treatment and you have basically a normal lifespan.
Yep.
And in fact, here's a bunch of other things that come out in your story. So if he had immediately gotten on antiretroviral therapy and taken it religiously, he would have probably established such a low level of viremia that he would be uninfectious.
Yeah. Because it happens. Let's be honest about it. Like and it's not just, guys, it's people, when you're young, you're out there, you're living your life, and you're doing, you're exploring yourself.
It's a time of experimentation.
Totally. 100%.
Yeah.
And I think at that young age, I felt even though I was married to this person, I got married very young. He's about 4 years older than me. I got married at 21. He was about 25. And I even felt, when I was exposed, like, I'm going to be fine. Yes, there's like a slight risk, but I'm sure like my body's just going to like.
Yeah. Well, look, I mean, that's the thing, is that,
Yeah.
We're actually evolved to ignore reality when the pain is too much, right? There is actually like a mechanism in there where we can, detach from that until we're ready to deal with it. But I mean, your journey includes going right in there and dealing with it, not just for him, but for yourself as well. So that's a important thing, that your story brings across is, hey, get on treatment. It's not as bad as it sounds.
Yeah.
And forget about it. Like, we all own and feel some guilt or shame or whatever about all different aspects of our past. And the taboo subject of sex.
Yeah.
There's no place where there's more, sort of untethered shame or, misunderstanding or whatever, than something that, we still haven't managed to talk about openly in our society. You notice, like, if you go to Europe, there's a lot more openness about sex.
Yes.
You go to Japan, there's less, right? It's like,
it depends on where you are. Yeah.
It depends on where you are, but we're somewhere in the middle. And the reality is that, we're not getting educated in ways that could be really beneficial as we deal with the complexities of making real life decisions as young adults. I mean, yeah. So anyway, so lesson number 1 is, hey, get on the meds. Lesson number 2 is the post exposure, right? I get it that you didn't know it. I didn't know it till I started working at AGT, and we started handling HIV in our laboratory because we have post exposure prep here.
Oh, okay.
Right.
Yeah.
Because, hey, somebody could get a needle stick, and if they immediately take a high dose, and it's a sickly dose, by the way.
Yeah, it's quite intense. It is.
It's intense, but worth it, right? To reduce your chance from one exposure is about 10% chance of getting it.
Yeah.
Right. In most cases, but this is too much. Right.
And I think that's a huge lesson to take too. And what I want to say also is, when my husband went to treatment, I mean, his viral load was so high. I can't, it was in the hundreds of thousands. It was so high.
Wow.
And his CD4 count was quite low. It wasn't at AIDS level yet, but it was quite low. So it does take a little bit to get there. And I just think that, it was a scary time for us, even when we went to go get treatment, to see like, wow, this is how bad it's gotten, right? This is, could have stopped this sooner. And the doctor was honest. He was like, why didn't you just come sooner? And he wasn't saying it in like a kind
like
of
a judgmental way.
Right. Not judgmental way.
No.
Exactly. It was like kind of like, don't you know about this education, similar to what you're saying.
Right.
So it's about
Well,
that.
it's so easy to not know all this stuff.
It's so
in
easy
our
and
society.
right.
And
Totally.
especially like, with the stigma around HIV, people don't talk about it.
Yeah.
Right. I mean, that's what's so
Yeah.
wonderful about this conversation is, we can just sort of talk about what we know, and
Yeah.
maybe that's adding to other people's knowledge of this.
Yeah. And I mean, that's why I do the whole TikTok thing and on social media. It's, I'm going to talk about it because no one else has, or no one else will. And even the ones that are talking about it, we're still quite small. We're a small but mighty group, and
Yeah.
we're doing it, but we kind of need everyone else's buy-in, because I think it's one thing to get someone who is living with it to talk about it and say it's fine. It's also another thing to get folks who maybe either are quite technically far removed from it, they have very low exposure, like, or risk, just to kind of talk about, it's fine. You're going to be fine. Because look at it this way. We were sort of, the worst case scenario happened to us. We can track it down to about approximately that one time that it happened. We can't think of any other time it could have happened to us, but it can happen to you if you are not being careful. You're just, you slipped up once and you didn't wear a condom. Like, look, it happens. Let's stop pretending like it's a really bad thing that doesn't happen. It can happen to anyone. I look like just like any regular old person out there. When I drop off my kids at school, I look like the other parents that drop them off. I don't look any different. I have some tattoos and some, about that, but that's different.
That's not different anymore either.
Yeah, not anymore. Exactly, not anymore. I look just like pretty much like the other parents. So it's just kind of like it doesn't make you, it doesn't turn you into a unicorn or anything like that. Like, you're just a regular person.
Right. You're not a pariah.
Correct.
You're not somebody who's like, destined for something bad,
Mhm.
and, you can have 3 kids that are HIV free. This is actually quite normal, right? A lot of people don't realize that too. A big question when people get their diagnosis is, can I have kids?
Yeah.
And the answer is absolutely yes.
Yeah.
And that the prospects for a well suppressed mother to have an HIV free child is nearly 100%. The chance it's almost, you're probably more likely to get in a car accident on the way to the hospital.
True.
So right, which is really, something. It's very important for people to know that. And you're so approachable. I mean,
thanks.
I love that you're doing TikTok, because I think that, you're really telling a message that is very important in your generation. And for, people that will look at you and go, oh yeah, I can identify with her, and then I can be open to her message. Right. And I can, educate myself and be more about it. It's really interesting. Like you said, you actually called it the worst case. Like, we're living with the worst case. And I'm like, but that's the whole point. It's not that bad.
Yeah. Right. And that's one of my points too, in saying that's like when you looked at us, like everyone was afraid that this would happen. Everyone was afraid that I would get it. And I did. And
your family was supportive.
So they were. So
they were supportive in one way, but in another way, they were super nervous. Like, they kept on telling you, don't do it. Right. But they seemed really supportive. And you said it's all a close family, and you were open about everything. Right. He was open with his family about it. And they were supportive of him. I mean, that's terrific.
They were supportive of him. I think, of course, that there's a shock that comes to it and everything like that. And I think that they definitely had more questions when they met me. They knew I knew about it. They were kind of like, does she really know what she's getting into? And I think my parents had the same question. I remember after we were married and, so when I was diagnosed, I didn't tell anyone for about a year other than my husband.
Mm-hmm.
And then I finally told my mother. And I remember crying about it. And she was just like, I knew this would happen. I was kind of like, what do you mean? And she was like, I had to accept that this could be a reality in order for me to move on. She goes, because then I realized, so what if you do? You take a pill, you're going to be fine. She kind of had.
Okay, so at least the back half of that story.
It was good. I promise. I'm like, follow me there. It's gonna be good. I promise.
Yeah.
Because it I'm a parent now, and I get it. If my daughter were to come to me and tell me that the person she's madly in love with has a really scary disease. Because let's face it, although yes, it's like it was in the media, it was kind of like, okay, all right, well, what do we do here? And I remember when we came out to my parents with it, my parents, they did it. They're so loving. My dad, big Mexican guy, and my husband's a very skinny, small Mexican guy. So he was kind of nervous approaching this conversation, but we were hanging out on a Saturday night, drinking some tequila, because my dad did not know what was coming. And we were just having a typical fun family get together. And my husband, Mom and Dad, we have something to tell you. Of course, they think, oh my God, she's pregnant. No, that's not the case. So my husband kind of like stops me. He's like, I need to be the one to say it. I like, thank you, but I need to be the one to tell them. Because we had just gotten engaged. So my husband wanted to make sure that he told them.
He was going to be the face of this message.
Yeah.
That's amazing.
Yeah.
No wonder you fell in love with him.
I know. He's a
I'm seeing all the emotion on your face. It's really amazing. Like even when you're telling parts of the story where you can tell it was exceedingly hard on you.
Yeah.
You absolutely see it in your face. And,
it's been a journey, like any other
sure.
thing. So he tells them, and we assure them, I'm at that time I was negative and their plan was to stay that way. And my mom, she just stood up and hugged him and she said, I'm so sorry this happened to you. But you're going to be okay. And my dad was very silent, which is not my dad. So I thought, oh God, what's going on? And he said, okay, let me think about this. He goes, he looked at my husband. He goes, you have it. And he looked at me, he goes, and you still love him and you still want to get married. And I said, yeah, I do. And he said, I can't get in the way of that. That is true love. So I will be here.
So he actually looked at it as in terms of the strength of your bond, right?
Correct.
That is amazing. Like he could see this as a test.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
In a way. Yeah. A test of your mettle.
Yeah.
Of your love.
Yeah. They're good parents,
This was the announcement that you were going to get married. And this is why your husband came up front of that. What about when you went and you told your mom about your diagnosis?
Yeah.
Was that by yourself or how did you?
I was by myself. But so we
and you took a year to do it too.
Yeah. So the timeline is engaged in March of 2010, exposed like around May, like what's that holiday that happens in May? Is it Memorial Day weekend? Like around then. Mm-hmm. He started treatment like late April. So that's kind of the timeline of it. We got married in July. So very quick things are happening, right? So we got married through like just legally and had a tiny ceremony. And we, we're a giant Mexican family. We needed to save up money. So we said in a year, we'll have the big wedding. Mm-hmm. So fall happens that year. I get diagnosed. The following May, so like around the date of I just realized the same weekend about what we think is the exposure. We're quite sure that was the only time it could have happened. That the Memorial Day weekend, my mom was throwing me a bridal shower with the whole family. And we were getting ready to go and she could tell I hadn't really seen her and spent a lot of time with her since then. And she was like, what's going on? And so I remember just sitting on her bed and I just started crying and I told her and she was like, I knew this could happen and it's okay. You're going to be fine. And he's going to be fine. Now let's go outside and help me take the stuff outside so we can have this party. Like get it together. And it was
just, see, this is the thing. Like, you're very readable. I suspect for your mother, it's kind of amazing that you were able to go a whole year without her.
I know. Probably because I hadn't seen her. Probably because I was finishing, I was in my last year of college and I was finishing it up and I hadn't seen her. And I'm a very honest person. I can't keep anything as a secret. I can
sympathize or empathize with that or relate to it. Whatever the correct term is. That's just amazing. Like your parents really stepped up. Right. And supportive parents come in every shape and size and every background and whatever. And this is another, very tough thing. That's, I guess, part of the stigma, right? Is like, okay, can I count on my support network still? And, how do I bring them in on this? That must have been a very tough thing for everybody. But your story is also beautiful in the way that they all stepped
up. Very lucky. Yeah. I'm very lucky. Yeah, I know other, folks. So, my husband and I are Mexican American. My mother was born in Mexico. My father was born in the US, but his parents were from Mexico. And so we are a very tight-knit family, and culturally, sex is quite a taboo. Women, we can get into, there's a whole separate conversation, but Latino women are supposed to be these like sexy, voluptuous women who are somehow still very pure and never have sex ever in their life, but somehow
Right.
push out a bunch of kids. Like,
What's wrong with this picture? Yeah, I
yeah,
get
it's a bit, and so like
Yeah.
that's sort of the thing, right? Is like we are not talking about sex. Like sex
Yeah.
happens, you guys. And then men, like Latino men, like my husband, are like supposed to be these like wild, Casanovas, and so it's kind of hard to like, let's have a real conversation about sex and then the consequences of sex. Like sometimes STDs happen, and what do you do to combat them? And so I think that what's also really important is that if you know of a family member who is either, has never been tested, has it has an STD or HIV, and let's just talk about HIV, take them in, embrace them, hug them, tell them that you love them, because they need to hear it. They, especially if you have a very tight-knit family, which is quite, typical of pretty much, I mean, I think any family, right, they have that, but take that person in. If you know their story, if they have kind of bared their soul with you and shared such an intimate part of themselves with you, you really kind of have to go a little bit, I don't want to say above and beyond, but really put yourself out there and show them that you're going to show up for them. One of the most loving things a friend of mine did was when I had first told her, I'm dating Jake. He's actually HIV positive. She wasn't the first person I told. She was one of my best friends at the time. She was like, let's go get tested. And I was like, well, no, there's no exposure. She goes, I don't care. You need to get used to this. Like, let's go get tested. And so she took me and we got tested together. Go do that. If you know your friends or your, cousins, your people who you love around those, go get tested. That way, at least if it's bad news, you guys have each other, but really just so you guys can get used to it. And doing it in a group is probably going to help.
Wow. Okay. So that, I'll tell you, I'm going to wrap up the interview here because this is really great advice. And if you don't mind me drawing one more conclusion, I'll let you,
Okay. No,
have the final word here. But the, the theme that I hear is that do not let HIV, the stigma of HIV with, on top of the stigma of sexuality in general, get in the way of loving relationships, whether it is between you and your husband, you and your boyfriend, you and your friend, you and your daughter, you and your mother, that, the reality of this should allow us to continue to connect in the way that we always have and to love one another.
Yes.
And, there's great medications out there.
Yeah.
There's great support systems. There's an awesome TikTok channel that we're going to put in the video here. Get up there and get some perspective on all this stuff. I'm talking to our audience right now is, there's a lot of really good information out there. I've had the honor and privilege of meeting a lot of people that are dealing with a diagnosis of HIV and dealing with it in an incredible way and living richer and in normal lives, but even richer lives than they could have without coming to grips with this, or even than a lot of people who just live in fear. And so, the truth and really understanding this is really worthwhile. I really got that from our discussion. Is there anything you'd like to add before we take this to a close? You must have something to say.
No, I think that you said it really, really well in that, don't let HIV get in the way of your relationships, no matter where your role in that relationship is. If you are the mother of a child who has HIV, don't let that scare you. Be the person to kind of wrap your arms around them and tell them it's going to be okay and help them. If you're the spouse, if you're the, significant other, if you're the sibling, whatever role you play in the role of, loving somebody with or living with HIV, don't let HIV get in your way, because, and don't let it get in the way of loving yourself either. It's not something to be ashamed of. You need to also.
Excellent point.
Like you,
right? We forget that loving yourself is an important loving relationship as well, isn't it?
Getting tested and getting on treatment is an incredible act of self-love. So, especially if let's say you haven't gotten a diagnosis yet, but getting tested is what I say is one of the most responsible, most radical forms of self-love you can do for yourself, because you are, and taking care of yourself is what you're doing.
Absolutely. Well said. And I really enjoyed this discussion. I learned a lot, and it was such a pleasure meeting you. And I hope we'll talk again, because now that I've had this discussion on HIV stigma with you, and you brought up the idea of just sexuality and sexual stigma, I think it's related. And wow, it just seems like you understand the full gamut of this stuff. That's like a whole nother interview.
Yeah. So. Next time I'll bring Jake. I'll bring my husband. He can talk about it.
Oh, fantastic. Yeah, I love it. All right. Well, thanks again. And
thank you.
I hope I'll see you again sometime.
Yeah. Thank you guys so much. Thank you.